This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. This story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old, and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house, and all of a sudden, the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on his couch, it happened again. He got up once again and turned the TV back on, and again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches and saw a man hiding in the corner, holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He gave my dad a smile, and my dad ran out the front door screaming like a little girl. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying.
When I was a kid, I was always the last kid picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day I was waiting for the bus by myself and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now. Just get on." He got more and more pushy but didn't do anything crazy. I kept just saying no and he shrugged and left. The real bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school and my parents didn't know until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls.
I am 22 and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, and then jumped out the window as my apartment is on the first floor. And then I called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go to across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to my apartment complex. This was during summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my friend and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The police that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital.
My uncle works for dispatch in my town, and he recently told my family of the weirdest call he's ever gotten. He says that he had received a call from a landline one night, and when he answered it, there was only static on the other end. This happened 2 more times. Finally, he calls a squad to go check out the address from the caller ID. When the cops get there and walk into the house, they immediately saw that there was a dead body. The person had been dead for 5 months. The craziest part about it was that there was no electricity or any other utility working, so there was no way they should have been able to get those calls into dispatch. But if they hadn't, who knows how long that person's body would have stayed there.
My 5-year-old daughter absolutely loved animals. She'd always wanted to get a cat or a dog, but my severe allergies prevented us from ever being able to get a pet. Even the pets that claim to be hypoallergenic really are not, since dander comes from skin, not hair. I did buy our tank with a couple of zebrafish, but that was a mistake as these fish very quickly became my responsibility. One afternoon while my husband was at work, I was washing the dishes. It was a nice and sunny day, and I would have much preferred to have been outside enjoying myself. My daughter was outside in our fenced-in backyard, having a tea party with her plush animals. I would like to say that I always kept a good eye on her, but sometimes I did get busy and lose track of time. But the fence in our backyard was a very high wooden fence with no gate, so I never thought it was possible that she was in any danger. When I was almost done washing the dishes, my daughter Cindy came running into the house. She was very excited and had a smile that simply reached from ear to ear. "Mommy, Mommy," Cindy cried joyously, "I got myself a doggie." I put down what I was doing and looked at her. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "A doggie got into our backyard and played with me," she informed me. "It told me that it was going to be my own special doggie." Well, I was really confused and very concerned. At first I was worried that a dog may have actually gotten into our backyard somehow. I immediately went into the yard to see, but there was no dog there, and there was no indication that there was any way a dog could have gotten into the yard. "Where is your doggie?" I asked my daughter, assuming that she had made up an imaginary pet. "Oh, he had to go home, but he told me he'd come back to visit me again." When my husband got home, I told him about what had happened. He wasn't concerned about it. He had had an imaginary friend when he was a child and told me that just because Cindy had wanted a dog so badly and couldn't have one, she likely made one up. I joked and asked him if he made up an imaginary friend because he couldn't find any real friends, and he stopped talking to me for the night. For the next week, things went on pretty much like they'd had that first day. While I was washing dishes or cleaning the kitchen, Cindy would be out in the backyard playing. Each time she came back and told me about her fun playing with her doggie. On Thursday, Cindy was out in the backyard playing when the strangest thing happened. I heard a bark. It was a very odd sounding bark, really deep and almost sounded kind of muffled. Well, I was immediately concerned. If a stray dog had been getting into the yard somehow, who knows what it could do to my daughter? It may have been carrying diseases, or, although it has been nice to her so far, if Cindy unintentionally irritated it, the dog might attack her. I put down my washcloth and ran out the back door. What I saw with Cindy was a lot worse than a stray dog. There was a man in my backyard, wearing a dog costume and playing with my daughter. It was a ratty costume, and it actually made him look like he was a stray. He was on all fours, but it was easy to tell he was a tall and large man. My daughter was throwing him a ball. While he was bringing it back to her, the man saw me standing on the back porch, a horrified expression on my face. The only thing I could do was yell at him, "Get the hell away from my daughter, you freak!" The man immediately jumped up onto his back feet and dropped the ball. With amazing dexterity that I could not believe for a man his size, he ran off to the fence and jumped onto it, pulling himself quickly up and over the top of it. "Don't go, doggy!" my daughter cried as the man ran off. He was quickly gone before I could do anything more. I did call the police, but there was very little they could do. Other than the fact that the man was wearing a dog suit, I couldn't give him a description, and obviously the suit was easy for him to take off. My husband was livid, but we were helpless. The police just told us we should be happy that I discovered what was going on before the man either injured or kidnapped my daughter. Well, needless to mention, they were right. 2 things came out of this experience. 1, my daughter no longer played in the backyard by herself. 2, She finally got a real doggie, a beautiful German Shepherd, which won't let any other dogs into its backyard. As far as my allergies go, I'll deal with it to keep my daughter protected.
This happened back when I was 15. I lived with my mother, sister, and little brother in a rather dodgy area in Western Australia. While my mother did a great job of keeping us away from the more dangerous parts of our suburb, 90% of the time my brother, who was 13 at the time, and I, being the reckless kids that we were, would always try to bend the rules when we could. So one day my mom tells us that she's going out to the shops to get ingredients for tonight's dinner, so I would have to watch over the house. I tell her no problem. 45 minutes pass with no issue at all. After a while, my little brother comes in and asks me if I'd like to go kick the football around at the park just around the corner from where our house was. While I can't remember the exact time, it was definitely later than 5:30, so it was starting to get quite dark. I tell my brother that Mom would be pissed if we went, but he insists, and eventually I give in and tell him to wait for me while I get changed into my sneakers, shorts, etc. After I'm done, I walk to the lounge room and realize my brother is nowhere to be seen. I check the front door, and lo and behold, it's open. I love my brother dearly, but I swear some of the shit he does is just retarded. I call out to my sister, who's 18, and ask if she knew where the dickhead had gone to. She replies that he had said to tell me that he was going to the park. By this point, the sun had already set, and outside it was quite dark. I was also shitting myself with anger. I tell her to watch the house, and I run off into the direction of the park. I get there, about 5 minutes later, and to my surprise, the park is completely empty. I call out my brother's name and tell him to cut the shit. No answer. I call it out again, but this time I tell him that our mom is home and that she's extremely angry with both of us and wants us to come home. Still no answer. This is where I start to get worried. Normally, my brother always falls for that trick, even when we're at home, and does what I tell him to do. Suddenly, I hear a faint, muffled noise coming from the left of me. I look and see a tall figure quickly moving behind a large fence, which covers an alleyway that runs parallel to the park on the left side from where I was. At this point, I guess you could say that my body went into overdrive as adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted as fast as I could and went around to the other side of the fence. I almost choked when I saw my little brother, shorts off, mouth covered, being dragged across to the other end of the alleyway by the man that looked to be in his mid-40s or 50s with long, unruly hair. Now, I know a lot of people would have screamed out at this point, but for some reason, don't ask me why, I just sprinted as hard as I could at this motherfucker. While I had tears in my eyes, more than scared for my brother, I was angry, like seriously infuriated. I was going to kill this cunt. He must have heard me coming because he turned around to face me and dropped my younger brother. I had run about 20 meters and I was now less than a meter away from him now. He tried to grab me, but I just kept running as hard as possible for me, and I ended up knocking him over. He swore and tried to get back up, but I just let loose and started stomping on his face and gut. I was going to keep on going until this fucker was dead, but reason came back to me after I heard my brother begin to cry loudly. Without asking any questions, I picked him up and ran as fast as I could with him back to my house. At this point, it was pitch black, and my mom was frantic. No doubt she was about to let loose on us. However, she stopped when she saw the look on both of our faces and realized that my brother didn't have any pants on. After explaining the situation, rather terribly because the adrenaline had worn off and I was blubbering like Morgan Freeman had died, my mom gave us both the biggest hug ever and cried with us. We called the police soon after, and I was asked by police officers to give details about the man's appearance, which I did as best as I could. I was lucky that I was dealing with a rather thin man as opposed to a muscle-bound freak who liked small kids. Thankfully, my brother told me that, yes, the man had come up behind him and subdued him, but had stopped taking off his clothes when he heard me call out his name. To this day, I am so thankful to whatever is watching over me that I didn't get there a second later and was able to successfully get my brother back. Needless to say, we moved to the suburbs soon after that, and we are now living in a steady upper-middle-class suburb up north.
It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he left them at my apartment. One night I was bored and decided to go out trying the goggles at a wooded hiking area In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea, since I was all by myself at the time, and a female. But I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there at night, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in a little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign "Park closes at 10", and entered the woods, night vision goggles in my hands. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with my little keychain flashlight. A couple times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods, a far distance away, but I thought it was nothing out of the ordinary and put it down to animal activity. Hopefully, the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I hiked a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day. Everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks playing around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green, after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man, dressed head to toe in dark colored clothing, making his way hiddenly through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come, and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree, and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few minutes to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on my back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter, and there were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation. A young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I had one, I wouldn't feel safe, as it might draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around, but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I heard in the woods when I first arrived, And then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car, if he'd circled back and seen my parked car alone in the lot, if he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever, but was probably half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me. But he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down, and still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all the sides of the car with something sharp, presumably a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me.
Alright guys, I'm that asshole. You know, that asshole who moves the pointer while playing with a Ouija board. I don't know why, I guess I just liked knowing I was the one responsible for scaring the shit out of people instead of something or someone I couldn't see. Or maybe I just didn't believe that a commercially made product could talk to ghosts. Who knows, but I found out karma definitely is a bitch. One night in college, a friend of mine was over and we were studying. One of those ghost shows came on the TV and they were messing around with a Ouija board. My friend, Liz, said offhandedly to me, "You know, I've never played with one of those." I was definitely surprised. Ouija boards were such a staple of my childhood. Hundreds of sleepovers with me scaring the crap out of my friends by moving the pointer on the board and that whole light as a feather, stiff as a board thing. I couldn't fathom someone growing up and not experiencing it. I started talking about random experiences I've had with the board and tried to convince her it would be a good idea to run out to the Walmart and buy one. Finally, I was successful and off we went, our studies abandoned on the table. College priorities at its finest, I guess. After our Walmart trip, we got back to my apartment and opened the box. We spared no expense. It was the glow-in-the-dark special edition. Talk about class. Liz looked like she was about to piss her pants as I explained how to put your fingers on the pointer. We lit some candles and turned off all the lights. "Okay, so just ask whatever," I said, secretly smirking. "Like what?" she asked. "I don't know, something fun, like when am I going to die or something." This was always one of my favorite questions for people to ask because while pushing the pointer, I could really freak them out. "I don't want to know that." Damn. I was a bit disappointed but went with it. I suggested just trying to open our minds and see who would come through. I was already planning to have JFK come through. Not many of my friends know I am a huge JFK fan, so I can usually creep them out with the amount of knowledge the ghost of JFK knows about his assassination and whatnot. We put our fingers on the pointer and nothing happened. I was letting the tension grow before I started my pushing. It's always better to start slow. All of a sudden, the pointer started to move. and I wasn't pushing it for once. "You can't push it," I yelled at her. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I didn't want her to ruin my plan. "I'm not," Liz shouted back. "Well, obviously you are, 'cause I'm not." "Aren't the ghosts supposed to move it?" she asked. I guess she got me there. I just sat back, shut up, and watched the pointer move. I was convinced she was moving it. She had to be. There was no way a ghost was communicating with us through a glow-in-the-dark spirit board that I bought for $17.99 at Walmart. After a few minutes, we finally got a message. IMISSULIZ. I miss you, Liz. Liz was understandably a bit freaked out that the spirit knew her name. I was too, but I kept telling myself she was moving it, whether it would be subconsciously or not. We kept going. "I need to see you again soon," it spelled out. "I need to see you again soon? What does that mean?" Liz asked, getting more and more freaked out. I don't know," I said, and honestly meant what I said. I had no idea what was going on. I hate to admit it, but I was starting to get freaked out. The Ouija board never worked for me before. "You're moving it," she yelled. "No, I'm not, I swear." And I did swear. I wasn't moving it for once in my life. "Yes, you are." She kept insisting I was moving it, but we kept going. The pointer stopped moving for a few minutes. I was intrigued, yet scared. I wanted to see what else it would do, but I was afraid of what I might find out. Finally, getting a bit impatient, I asked the first question of the night. "Who is this? What do you want?" "I am Will." "Hello? Liz, I still love you." Liz looked like she was going to lose her dinner all over the board. "Who's Will?" I asked. "Seriously, are you moving it?" Liz responded in a thin whisper. "No, I told you I wasn't. Who's Will?" "He's, my ex-boyfriend who killed himself after we broke up." "Really? Are you moving it? 'Cause this isn't funny." I tried to convince her that I wasn't, but she didn't believe me. She just sat there looking like, excuse the pun, she had just seen a ghost. I suggested that we quit. "Listen, Liz, obviously this is upsetting you. Let's just stop now and—" "No, I need to know if he's okay," she said with a determined look on her face. "But I have to make sure it's not just you pushing it and fucking with me." After a bit of discussion, we decided that I would keep my fingers on the pointer but keep my head down and not look. That way, I wouldn't know where to push it. I agreed and sat there, feeling more and more uneasy. I put my head down and closed my eyes, trying to focus all of my energy, or whatever the hell Ghost Will needed to maybe bring some closure to Liz. After about a minute of sitting there with my head down and eyes closed, I started to go cold all over. It was unlike any other feeling of cold I have ever had. The only way I can describe it is that my bones were cold and it was chilling me from the inside out. I tried to brush it off. Maybe there was a draft coming in from the cool spring air outside. Then, without warning, my head, for lack of better term, exploded with all of these gruesome images I couldn't control. It was as if any single irrational or rational fear that I had throughout the course of my life multiplied its intensity by 1,000 and slammed into my brain at the same time. It only seemed to last for a second and a year at the same time, but regardless of however long it was, every single image was burned into my head. I jerked away from the table, trying not to scream. "What's wrong?" Liz asked, smiling at me. What the fuck was she smiling about? Why are you smiling? What the fuck is so funny? I could barely contain myself. Deep down, I knew I was acting crazy, but I couldn't help it. Nothing's funny. I'm just smiling because I had the nicest conversation with Will. He doesn't blame me. What the hell do you mean? I snapped again. It's only been like a fucking minute since we started. Liz's face scrunched up in confusion. What do you mean? I've been talking to Will for the last 2 hours. What the fuck? Needless to say, I was a bit creeped out. Okay, more than creeped out. I was terrified. I threw that damn board back in the box as quick as I could and blew out all of the candles. I shoved the box into the closet as far back as it could go. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I announced abruptly that I was going to drive Liz home and opened the door, trying to hurry her. It was definitely out of character. She obliged, however, and we got into the car. The whole 5-minute drive seemed like an eternity. I could swear I'd see things on the side of the road, but at second glance, they weren't there. Images I had seen of my babysitter mutilated and whatnot from that weird trance-like dream, I had started to shimmer in the corner of my eyes. I swerved about 1,000,000 times thinking I was going to hit one of these things, but nothing was there. By the time we got to her apartment, Liz looked at me like I was crazy or something. Are you sure you're okay? She asked. Yeah, just get out of the damn car already, I snapped back at her, almost surprising myself with how mean I was being. Though I fully admit to fucking with people while using Ouija boards, I really am a nice person, I swear. Liz did as I asked and I sped away, eager to get to the safety of my apartment. When I opened the door, I noticed 2 things right away. It was about 30 degrees in the apartment and all of the blinds and curtains were wide open. I was confused, but I tried not to let my mind wander. I shut all of the curtains and cranked the heat. It was April, so it wasn't freezing outside, but it wasn't exactly hot either. Normal springtime weather. After shutting all of the blinds and whatnot, I sat on the couch and tried to turn on the lamp. The light went on and then popped off. I again tried to shake it off as a shitty coincidence. I changed the light bulb and went to turn it on again. Pop. Out again. I then went to go turn on the overhead light instead. Pop. All 3 bulbs popped off at the same time. At about this point, I was basically pissing my pants. I was so scared, but I tried to remain as calm as I could. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. I grabbed as many blankets as I could and sat on the couch in the now dark living room. I was going to light the candles we had used when we used the board, but I didn't want anything related to that fucking thing around me. I turned on the television and blared it, hoping that I could just attribute any noise and flash of something in the corner of my eyes to the television. Come on, you know you've done that too. Unfortunately, it didn't work. I was just starting to doze off when this loud beeping woke me up. It sounded like the worst alarm clock ever. It was coming from the closet where I had thrown the Ouija board. I slowly went over and opened the door. Out fell an alarm clock, an old one that I used to have. I think it was my roommate's. I hope it was my roommate's, blaring uncontrollably. I hurriedly shut the door so the Ouija board would stay in there, and I started looking at the clock to turn it off. Not only were there no batteries in it, nor was it plugged in anywhere, but the time flashing on the clock was 4:16 a.m. My birthday. What the actual fuck, okay? Needless to say, I threw that thing quite far and it broke into 1,000,000 pieces. I wish it stopped there, I really do, but little did I know that was just the warm-up, so to say, the opening act to a shit show that has become my life. I hope this is enough to convince everyone never ever, ever to fuck with a Ouija board.
I'd been planning to take some L at this punk show in Austin, Texas. I've tripped acid around 50+ times since, but I cry even thinking about this trip in particular. It was the one time the mighty me, somebody who never loses control, would go completely nuts and nearly suffer dire consequences. We stopped by my house at a meeting spot so we could begin following the others to the show. I was in the car with my friends Jordan and Andrew. In the other car would be some characters known to me as Aaron, Robert, and Shane. Nobody else knew I dropped acid at the show. I ate 2 slices of the gel. It would take effect way faster than it ever had before. I felt like I had taken something almost as soon as the shit landed on my tongue, but it really took hold within 25 to 30 minutes. Placebo or not, I knew I had a chemical in my body and it was about to do its work. We had a 1-hour drive from X to Y, so I knew I'd be kicking by the time of the arrival. It would be at this time all words would become meaningless and not worth saying because words couldn't put together anything I was feeling or doing, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I was sitting in the back of the car, and everything was coming to life before my very eyes. I began to see 3-dimensional flowers pulsating from the back seat, and they were getting very playful with each other. And the more happy I felt about them, the more sensitive and swishy they would get. I felt put on the spot. I had to look at myself in the mirror just to reassure myself that I am still there. I was becoming an amorphous blob, a good old puddle of fuckness it was in my mind. I could tell I was coming up harder than I ever had in my life, and I was unprepared. I was also sweating bullets. It brought a very weird sensation I have never felt again. My skin melting. I literally felt my skin just melting downwards with the sweat. I almost fooled myself into thinking, yes, I am actually fucking melting right now. Once we got to the venue, my doors swung wide open, and a bunch of really hairy people that looked like wolfmen. They grabbed me and pulled me out of the car. I looked up and saw this group of strange people, and they were saying things like, "Damn, how much did you take?" "Bad trip." "How was the weather over there?" I couldn't tell one person from the next. For instance, I look at Shane, but he is wearing my friend Kingsley's face, and he isn't even at the show. I thought I knew who I was looking at, but the faces all looked the same, dark and really fuzzy, some very reptilian and sculpted. I would go with the flow of this feeling and leave my body for periods of time where perception would totally go haywire. I found myself inside the venue. I could feel a lake of sweat pouring down my entire body. I'm walking around holding my ticket out in front of me like a moron. Walking felt like I was walking on water, if you can imagine what that feels like. Safety first. I see a large pole in the middle of the place and decide to wrap my entire body around it like a snake to keep balance. The music was knocking me off my feet and I needed support. Ravenous black and blue outlined cats ran across the floor. They were very agitated and wet pussies. I had to really watch my step at this point. The mosh pit turned into a whirling vortex of fists, knives, and assault weapons. People ran by me and would throw themselves violently into the vortex, some grabbing me, trying to take me with them. The crowd was not human anymore. I didn't even know why I was there. I was now in hell. The people were just not normal to me. They had become very mutated and vampiric. The world seemed very alien, and they all stormed and stomped in a great circle, laughing and chanting my name while I'm in the middle wrapped around this pole for dear life. They began pulling out AK-47s, machetes, and RPGs, and fired all their guns and missiles into the ceiling for a while before the devil himself stepped onto the stage very casually. A very loud note was hit after this, and I saw 2 sexy women, legs spread wide open to a fiery fucking explosion, of course, that rose from the stage. thus revealing the most epic show I had ever seen in my life. The frontman, Satan, was growing to a gargantuan size as the song began, and for the moment it seemed like it was just me and him. He pointed at my face like something out of a 3D movie and nodded at me. His hair flickered all around and curled into snakes at the ends that hissed at me. He was most definitely welcoming me to my new, chaotic home. All the gutter punks began to have a giant orgy at this point, covered in blood. A lot of them were touching me and trying to assassinate my sense of character and humiliate me sexually. I let go of the pole and hit my face on the floor. I was crawling around this sticky, bottomless pit, slammed against the wall before I turned around, feeling my way around it until I found a staircase that led far into the ceiling. I sat on the very bottom step and was almost forced into staring at the ground, trying to ignore the intense visuals. And right when my fear hits its breaking point, I see the whole entire building just fucking collapse with everybody in it. And over and over and over again, this cruel but perfect visualization would repeat itself until I couldn't possibly be any more scared. It was as if my fear itself just broke, snapped in half, and the image of my shattered soul and mind had been burned into my eyes. I saw Jordan in front of me now, and all around him, all I can see is an infinite pattern of stairs cascading violently in and out of each other, with him stuck in the center, trying to get my attention with facial expressions. Jordan says when he actually looked over at me, he said my hand was in an L shape around my mustache, pointed over towards some people standing at the bar. He said I took a really deep breath and began shouting, "Watch out! The fucking stairs!" He also says any time he saw me at the show, I would be paralyzed, taking enormous breaths, and I would smile at the ground every few seconds, but then I'd go back into a very serious, jaw-dropping and petrified stare. He reports he was worried about my mental state at this time. Now the worst feeling of all was feeling completely abandoned. I knew that my friends were going to leave without me at this point and be laughing their asses off about it on the way home, yucking it up and saying shit like, "Yeah, we sure showed that guy," leaving him back there tripping and shit. I just sat back and accepted it like nothing though. I figured I had already accepted I was dead by this point, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being left here to die. I had to put all my trust into my friends, and for them to just drive me to hell and leave me there just wasn't them. Now I would finally see the light. Through all this madness and chaos, this was not who I expected to see in hell. I saw Jesus Christ standing in a window. He was smiling and waving for my attention. I ran to him as fast as I could, and I stood before him for a while, staring straight into his face, gasping for breath, sweat pouring down my face. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I was so happy that if anyone could help me in this situation, it would be Jesus. He kept speaking, but it sounded like he just inhaled a shitload of helium, so I couldn't understand. I grabbed him by the shoulders and I yelled, "Thank God you're here." His lips moved again, but I couldn't understand. I sat and smiled crazily at him, still holding his shoulders. Then I kept yelling, "What?" at him, getting closer and closer to his face each time because I couldn't fucking hear what Jesus had to say, and I was getting pissed. So at some point, one of my friends directs me outside and is leading me away. Apparently Jesus was trying to sell me something cool and shiny. I was led outside to the car, until we were eventually driving home, just me and Jordan. I asked him 1,000 times if he knew where we were and if they were going to leave me. He reminded me I was perfectly fine and that they weren't going anywhere without me. But I had to reassure myself every 2 minutes this wasn't happening. After being in the car for a timeless amount of time, I began to feel way better, and the ego death began to cease, and I was feeling what I normally felt when I took acid and was happy to embrace the creamy tenderness. I realized also this whole scene took place within a 3-hour period, and I still had many to go. I got home. I fucking made it, I cheered. I was dissociated the rest of the night, going over what just happened to me. I kept having momentary flashbacks, shattered fragments of the show I was just at that blew my fucking balls off. I kept hearing the guitar screaming solos while my body convulsed, and I would see myself from bird's eye view sitting on the stairs. Then I'd go even higher, and I'd be looking down at the venue from the sky, but I couldn't stop it. I soared even higher. Then the next thing I knew, I was seeing the entire world from space. Everybody I ever tripped with to that point was standing around the earth in a circle, and we were oscillating. They even showed the characteristics they usually showed whilst tripping. Somehow I just knew that they were all here in some fucked up way. I could feel a wobbling feeling, and the visuals went from side to side like I was on a boat for a moment, before I was just looking down at myself from a bird's eye view again. I was still at the show.
Growing up in Arizona, you experience a rich mix of cultures. People come here from the Midwest, some people brave the desert and come from the South, and some people have been here since before the place was a state. Some say this is because Arizona has no real culture of our own that we borrow from everyone else. This state is rich in the paranormal. Many Native American tales tell of demons in White River, skinwalkers, vampires, tribes of little people who take children in the night, Wendigos up north, or the popular Thunderbird. This isn't a story about all that. This is the retelling of my experience with the Lady in Black. Growing up, I would hear stories from my friends who are of Mexican background of La Llorona, the Lady in Black. This story is meant to keep children inside after dark and to keep them from sneaking out at night. These legends of the lady came north with the people. It seems though that she came too. The story goes something like this. There was this beautiful lady in Old Mexico. She was not from a rich family, nevertheless she caught the attention of a son of a Mexican nobleman. They fell in love in secret. They got married. Not long after, she found that she became pregnant with twins. Like all ghost stories, this one ends tragically. The nobleman's son was found out. The father was so enraged that his bloodline was tainted with the blood of a commoner that he tried to force the local bishop to grant a divorce to cancel the marriage. Mexico was very Catholic in those days. The bishop refused. The father eventually seemed to cave in. He allowed her to move into the house. She eventually gave birth to the twins. One boy, one girl. A year later, the son of the nobleman was called off to war. He didn't return. The father became reclusive, hardly talking or eating. He grew to hate the children that would now inherit everything. The commoners marrying into his family were just waiting for him to die and take everything. He ordered his men to take the children to the nearest river and drown them and let their bodies be taken by the current at night so there would be no proof. The children were taken in the middle of the night without a sound. The mother was kicked out of the house the next day and later accused of killing her children. The townsfolk eventually drowned the heartbroken woman. She didn't put up a fight, she had already died inside. Days later, the nobleman and his men were found dead in his house. Sightings started happening of a beautiful woman dressed in black roaming the streets at night, crying looking for her children. If you saw her, and you were a child, she would stop crying, grab you, and take you to the river where you would be drowned. I told you that story to tell you this one. I was out running about a month ago, as often as I do. I run late at night, around 10 or so. I run near the canals that are all over Phoenix. I take my American Bulldog with so no one messes with me. The path I take when I go running is very well lit, and it is right next to canals and houses. It always felt safe until the night I saw her. I was running with my dog as usual. I was listening to my iPod and tracking my mileage. I started to see something in the distance about a quarter mile away. It looked like a person under one of the street lamps that light the path at night. I thought nothing of it at first because I often see people when I run. As I got closer, I began to notice that this person wasn't moving, just a silhouette under the light. The closer I got, the more the silhouette started to take shape. When I was about 50 feet away from it, I stopped. My first thought was that it was a homeless person or this was some sort of prank. My dog started to whimper, then growl, then whimper, then growl again. I had never seen him do that before. I looked at her. I could tell it was a woman. Something about her deeply unsettled me. Then, I got the feeling in my stomach that something wasn't quite right and that I needed to get out of there. I couldn't see her face. Her hair was long and black. It was covering it. She looked like she was wearing a short black dress, which was odd because it was 60 degrees that night. She was tall, taller than I had first estimated. She was thin and her arms and legs seemed to be a tad too long for her body. She was just standing under the streetlight. I took my headphones out because I was going to ask if she was alright. Before I could ask, my ears were filled with very fast Spanish being spoken in a whisper. It was raspy, the voice filled my head. She raised one long arm at me and extended her index finger. It looked more like a tree root than a finger. I had had enough. My dog sensed my fear. I took a step back, she took a step forward. I paused for what seemed like a solid minute, but it was probably a few seconds. That's when I started to hear the crying. It started off as a wail, then grew into a full scream. I turned tail and ran as fast as I could to the main road. When I looked back, she was gone. I ran back to my neighborhood along the main road. The entire time I was trying to make sense of what had just happened and whether or not someone was fucking with me. The entire run home I could feel eyes on me. I entered my neighborhood, the feeling was still there. I was dreading running back to my house because there are areas that aren't well lit. I decided to sprint the last 0.2 miles. As I was doing this, I happened to look down a cul-de-sac that had one light at the end. And yes, she was there. Her silhouette as clear as day. She had not only followed me and kept pace with me, but she had also beaten me to my neighborhood. My dog pulled. We made it to my front doorstep and I opened the front door and ran in and slammed it. I took a shower and tried to forget about everything. I locked every door in the house and the door to my bedroom. My dog slept at the foot of my bed that night and I left the TV on. I drifted to sleep around 3 a.m. The next morning I woke up and discovered that somehow I had acquired a large scratch that ran down the whole of my bicep. It would eventually scar. A few days after that I was talking with my neighbor as I often do. I told him about what had happened. He said this: "I know what that was. The best advice I can give you is to leave her alone. She marked you and will leave you alone. She marks the ones she doesn't like and takes the ones she does." He told me something similar had happened to the person who lived down the street from us. It ended up driving him crazy. He said that it all started with a picture his niece drew him. He wouldn't say any more than that. He kept telling me to leave it be. I called my friend Justin after that. I couldn't let this go. How could I? I had been followed by something and was marked. This kind of thing doesn't happen to people. My buddy Justin's family is Mexican. He also loves this sort of thing. I described what happened and he asked if it was La Llorona or the lady from the story. He told me that it was possible as there were many vengeful spirits like this. He told me the same story I read before, but with a few key distinctions. The lady was never pregnant, but she was beautiful. She fell in love with a nobleman's son who played with her heart, promising to marry her, but instead married another woman. The woman, heartbroken, became depressed. She began to see her beauty as a curse. She took a knife and disfigured her face. He told me that no one saw her face from then on because she would cover her face with her long black hair. When he told me this, I thought back to my encounter and my blood turned to ice. The legend finishes that she longed for someone to love for her heart and not her beauty. This didn't happen and she eventually drowned herself. She was cursed though, and now wanders through looking for someone who will love her. She will never be satisfied. Her hatred has twisted her. Some people say she appears to them as a monster. Some say she appears to them as a beautiful woman. Those who say she appears to as a beautiful woman will be driven mad with affection for her. Those are the ones she's chosen to love her. Those are the ones who can see her for her and don't see her as a monster. I got off lucky, I guess. This should have been the end of it. This should be where the story ends. It doesn't. I became so curious I went to my neighbors who lived down the street. I had to know what became of the other man who saw her. When I knocked, an old woman answered. I told her that this would sound weird, but that I needed her help. I asked her about the man who used to live here. It turns out it was her ex-husband. I cautiously asked her if she knew anything about a woman in black. She looked at me in a funny way and asked me if I had seen her. I told her I had. She gave me the same advice my neighbor had given me, to leave this alone. I told her that was no longer an option. She sighed and told me to come with her. We went into her attic and she gave me 2 large boxes. She said that everything I wanted to know was in there. This was apparently all that her ex-husband had left in his apartment when he disappeared. She told me to read everything and that if I still wanted to look for her after, then I was a fool. I took the boxes home and spent a weekend going through everything. There were journals, home movies, drawings, and other things I'm still not sure about. The thing that unnerved me the most was a drawing that looked like it had been done by a child. It was all black, of a tall, thin figure with long hair, long arms, and fingers that looked like roots. My stomach turned uneasily. I matched the drawing to the one of the first journal entries. September 9th, 2004. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed. I went on a walk again last night to see if I could find her. It seems she has found me. Macy, who I found out was his niece, drew me a picture today. She has been staying with us while my brother and his wife are in Denver. She handed me the picture and told me that the lady who lives under the stairs told her to draw it and to tell me she wasn't coming back. I have to see her again. The crazy guy seemed to be in love with this woman. He was obsessed with her. I will include a few more entries. Most of the journals are bogus. He kept them, it seems, to document this to show that he wasn't going crazy. Most of it seems to be babbling on about trying to find her. October 5th, 2004. I am no longer in love with my wife. Lorena, as I have come to call her, has my heart. I saw her face. She showed me her face. She is beautiful. I have to be with her. I understand her. She is not a monster. She is a beautiful woman. October 7th, 2004. She visited me in my dream last night. I never wanted to wake up. She spoke to me in a voice sweeter than honeysuckle. I have decided to leave my wife. He did. December 31st, 2004. The new apartment isn't grand or glorious, but it's ours. She comes to me at night, telling me that we will soon be together. I am going to start recording our encounters to show everyone I am not crazy. This is love. This is pure. I am happy, and she loves me. This is where things get really weird. He has started taping himself with a video camera. I watched most of it. He kept the lights mostly off, but he said she likes the darkness better. He only had on 1 or 2 lights at a time. From the looks of his new home, he was living in a cheap apartment. One video in particular was set up in a bathroom. He had grown a beard by this point. In this video, he took out a razor and instead of shaving with it, he removed the blade and started cutting his face with it. He took blood from his face and drew a heart in the mirror. He looked over his shoulder into the darkness and said, "I love you too." Then the whispering started. The camera shut off. The last tape was the weirdest by far. It starts off with him sitting down at his dining table, which was a fold-down card table. He had a large smile on his face. That's all the tape showed for 3 minutes, is him sitting there, smiling in the dark. His eyes seemed to follow something around the room. He nodded occasionally. The light above the table eventually went out, at which point the camera turned to night vision. He was still smiling. Then a shadow appeared behind him. Long root-like fingers found their way down to his chest until her palm found its place on his shoulder. He closed his eyes and his smile widened. The last part of this video made my head hurt and my stomach lurch. "Mi amor," I heard the voice say on the video before the camera shut off. They never found his body. That night, I packed his stuff up, and the next morning I returned his things to his ex-wife. I have stopped looking for her. I wonder if she ever thinks about me. Number 2.